Hello everybody, this is the Russian Fredbear. Welcome back to my Let's Talk series. Today is going to be the part 2 video on my little Five Nights at Freddy's discussion here. So last video we discussed the main gist and lore of the game itself. So, with 3 games and a movie and the 4th game announced, we have dived very far into this game series. We have got so many questions, most of them unanswered, a few of them answered, and we need answers stat. A lot of theorists have come up with theories, but we are not 100% sure if these theories are correct. So, what I want to do in this video, by the way, there might be a third part, I really don't know. Just a sec. Let's see if I can cover that up a little bit, try and make the lighting a little better. Anyway, so what we're going to do in this video is discuss the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline and just talk about what happened between the purple guy, the murdered children, the possessed animatronics, etc., etc., etc. Alright, so let's get started. So, the very first restaurant, Fredbear's Family Diner. It is believed that it was a small establishment owned by a local person. There was only one animatronic, Freddy, or he was known as Fredbear back then. One day he was taking cake to a bunch of children. While there was a children locked out of the restaurant crying, he wanted to get in and have some cake. Then, a purple man pulls up in a purple car, murders the kid, and drives off. It is believed that this tear-stained child goes on to possess the marionette. So then what happens is after this murder, or for one reason or another, Fredbear's Family Diner closed down and they sell off the company to Fazbear Entertainment. So Fazbear Entertainment decides to make all new animatronics that double in both animatronics and suits. So they make Golden Freddy, who was known as Freddy Fazbear back in the day, and Springtrap, who was Bonnie or Spring Bonnie. And they were the only 2 animatronics. Maybe the marionette was around back then too, because those 3 paper plates represent Freddy for sure, Bonnie for sure, and we could always assume that it's the oldest variations of them, which is believed to be Golden Freddy and Springtrap. Now, the people think the third one represents BB, but actually it might represent the marionette, because recently a theory was made that the marionette used to be a lot more happy, like he used to have like a Looney Tune look to him. That made him look a lot more happy, but once he got possessed, he turned, like, sad and crying, like, or something. It was through one of the pictures in Five Nights at Freddy's 3, in the fact that the coworkers thought that that was just from cosmetic wear and him getting withered and old, but really it was from him getting possessed in the kid, and that he was a lot more happy back then, and he had a much more cartoony, bright, and bouncy look to him. And I think it might actually be the marionette, because they both have 3 buttons on their shirt, and I know, the marionette is super skinny, but it's not necessarily possible to make a skinny paper plate person. Plates are round, so unless you somehow find a square paper plate, or rectangular, it's not necessarily going to happen. Anyway, so Golden Freddy and Springtrap were there back then for sure. So Phone Guy, the original Phone Guy, decides to make some audios on audio training cassettes on how to, you know, operate these suits and how you can compress the endoskeleton, providing room to climb inside and use them as suits. So that you can wear them as a suit for a birthday party or an animatronic to perform. Now, we learned this in Five Nights at Freddy's 3 through some quote-unquote prehistoric and vintage audio training cassettes that were learned. Now, we learned that these endoskeleton parts are pressed out of the way through spring locks. However, these spring locks come loose very easily. If you nudge, touch, or even breathe on them, they're coming loose. The endoskeleton parts are going to bounce out or something like that, and you're going to... yeah. So we also learned that there were multiple locations, as Phone Guy says, at the sister location, due to many spring lock failures, the spring suits are being retired. We'll get into that in a little bit. So that means that the spring suits at this point are being retired, due to the fact that the spring Bonnie suit, the spring lock failed. Therefore, the person inside it died. And he says at the sister location, meaning that there are multiple locations of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And if it's a food chain, like resembling Chuck E. Cheese's per se, then it would make the most sense for there to be multiple locations, right? Yeah. So there might have been 2 locations, there might have been even more, because I think at one point he says most locations are disbanding the spring lock suits. Anyway, so the spring lock suits are retired and put into a quote-unquote safe room in the back of Freddy's. This, in the back of Freddy's, there's supposedly a safe room built into every Freddy Fazbear's Pizza that customers don't know about, is invisible to the animatronics programming, and is off camera. We obviously never knew anything about this until it was brought up, and we shouldn't have because it was off camera. So here's, I think, what happened. So Golden Freddy and Springtrap got put into this back safe room. That explains why we can't see Golden Freddy at all in both FNAF 1 and FNAF 2. In FNAF 1, it was assumed that he was in the kitchen because the camera was disabled in there. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So, then they redesigned Fredbear, the original animatronic. I think they redesigned him and renamed him as the new Freddy Fazbear. Then, they made a new version of Bonnie the Bunny, and then they added in Chica the Chicken and Foxy the Pirate. And they became the new faces of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Unfortunately, this Purple Man struck again. He became an employee at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, learning knowledge of employees only parts of the building. He used the Springtrap suit. Yes, we all thought it was Golden Freddy, but I think it might have actually been the Springtrap suit, or either one. I really don't know. He uses either the Golden Freddy suit or the Springtrap suit to lure kids into a back room, and he murders 5 more. The puppet then does what he did himself when he got murdered back in the diner days, and puts them into the suits, giving their souls new life or something like that. So Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. However, the Golden Freddy one, that one was always a bit quirky, due to the fact that it's never legitimately shown in the 8-bit minigame in FNAF 2 that he, gives him a gift, and then the gift of life. So maybe he found it in there himself. That may explain why the Golden Freddy possession has always been a bit quirky. But then again, I'm pretty sure Golden Freddy's endoskeleton has been removed, due to the fact that the spring locks have failed. Anyways, so due to this next murder, and the animatronics getting possessed, and the kids possibly getting stuffed into these animatronic suits, they start to smell, bleed, mucus, all that other blast stuff, reanimated carcasses, yada yada yada. The restaurant closed down by year's end, and that's that. Then, in '87, another Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opens its doors to the public, and here's what happens. So, the old animatronics are attempted to be revived, but when it just is deemed too hard to pull off, they just go in a whole new direction and spend a quote-unquote small fortune on these new animatronics. With criminal database, advanced mobility, they let them walk around during the day. Well, this was before the bite of '87, so we'll get into that in part 3 most likely. So, they use the old animatronics in the back room for parts. Now, Golden Freddy and Springtrap are most likely being stored in this designated safe room, while BB, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, the toy versions, and Mangle are all set up to the public. Now, the marionette, I don't think he was created when FNAF 2 came out. I think he's been around for a while, but they were too lazy to make a new marionette, so they just kept him in his initial form, so to speak. So then, after a few weeks of of people working at Freddy's, and then Jeremy comes along for his shift. So, if it's not the phone guy who's the murderer, then it's probably the day shift guard, the guy who, worked in the place before Jeremy did. Anyway, so what ends up happening is on the 6th night, you get a newspaper that says, after being open only a few short weeks, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is closing its doors. The new animatronics will be scrapped due to possible malfunctions, probably because Mangle bit Jeremy on the birthday party on Sunday or something. I'll get into that in probably part 3 or later in this one. However, the original characters are being kept in hopes of a possible reorganization of the company. It is a minor setback, but we are confident that we will reopen someday, even if it is on a much smaller budget. And yes, I know I'm using quotation marks way too much in this video, but that explains why the FNAF 1 location is significantly smaller than the FNAF 2 location. They spent so much money on those new animatronics, they are on a very low budget, and they need to save as much money as possible. So I think the reason that the old animatronics were kept was because, relatively speaking, like, in a way, they're actually safer than the new ones, because Mangle, being all broken and malfunctioned, bit Jeremy, with the wide open mouth and all that stuff. So I think Mangle is the most likely victim at this point for the bite of 87, which is why the new animatronics ended up being scrapped, because they had malfunctions in them, while the old animatronics were deemed safer. Wow, I really am not sure. They both sound equally menacing to me. So then they all got moved to the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. We'll get into that in part 3. The Russian Fazbear, out.